Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Charles Alaimo, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, John.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. You're joining us from Long Island, New York. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about your recent book, HR Leadership During Bankruptcy and Organizational Change. I'm really excited to explore this because this is a slightly different angle to an organizational change topic that we talk about a lot on this podcast. And that is, leading HR through bankruptcy as an organization is going through that kind of strife. I think this is going to be really insightful. So I'm excited about this. We've been working on this, setting this up, and this has been in the books for a really long time. So I'm happy that we're finally able to sit down and have this conversation together. As we get started, I wanted to share Charles's bio with everybody. With over 30 years of human resources generalist experience, Charles Alaimo has overseen all global HR processes, including compensation, performance management, policy development, recruiting, learning and development, and has worked closely with organizations' boards of directors with a global mindset. He is a self-proclaimed global citizen with a high degree of cultural awareness and sensitivity. Currently, he serves as managing director of human resources for Group 1 Trading LP, a privately held derivatives trading firm. Recently, Charles served as Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Aceto Corporation, where he was responsible for the global HR function and integration activities through 3 acquisitions and the company's Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing and sale in 2019. And I suspect we will be hearing more about that as we get into this conversation today. Again, Charles, it's a pleasure to have you. Anything else you would like to share with me or the audience by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
No, I think you covered everything, John. So again, happy to be here and happy to chat about my experiences.
There are so many books around HR topics, so many org change books. I guess my first question, well, really for any author, I like to ask why this book, why now? But why specifically did you feel it was important to write this book about HR leadership during bankruptcy?
Great leadoff question, and for me, writing is a very cathartic experience. So if I've been through something tough, I like to kind of put my ideas on paper and just kind of write it away, so to speak. So for me, when it was announced that Aceto was entering a Chapter 11 and looking for strategic buyers, my first thought was, as I had been at the company for 8 years, like, how am I going to lead my organization and be credible with the employees, right? That was my first thought. And I knew nothing about bankruptcy. And we had some really great consultants, which helped us through the process. But when I went out on my own to see what resources were out there, many of those resources were either written in a financial context, and geared towards CFOs, obviously because of the topic, or they were written for general counsel. So there was really nothing out there that an HR professional can kind of grasp and kind of succinctly guide them through the steps. And so what I wound up doing as I was going through the process for close to a year, took tons of notes. And when I had left Aceto in April of 19, I took those notes and started writing the book in the hopes of helping another HR or business leader. And so I wrote it in a very simplified manner, as if we were discussing the topic over a cup of coffee. So that's how it all originated. And I'm really happy I was able to get my thoughts down on paper.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the background. I think it's just really helpful to know where an author is coming from when they're working on a book like this. It's a labor of love. It's really intensive. It takes a lot of time and energy and thought, lots of revisions, all of that that goes into making a good book that's a good experience for the reader, and that's helpful. And I appreciate how you identified the gaps in all of the books out there. There's so many leadership books. There are so many HR books. There are so many org change books, but I'm not aware of a lot of books that specifically address this issue to fill the gaps the way that you are, which in and of itself is quite impressive that you're able to find that niche because the market is flooded with content. So that's really important to know, and we're going to dig into what that content is and what these lessons are for organizational leaders and HR people here as we continue with the conversation. But again, thanks for the background on the book. Now, you have been through a lot of change throughout your career, changing not only your own career, your own evolution of your career path, the different roles that you've been in, all of those sorts of things. But how and why was bankruptcy different from some of those other changes that you experienced either personally or that you saw within organizations when you're in these various roles? How was it different? How was it similar? And maybe we can explore that a little bit.
Throughout my career, I've been through so much change, and it's funny because people who know me, I'm really a sentimentalist at heart, and I don't like a whole lot of change in my personal life. So for some reason, I've gravitated towards these roles in business, and I've been good. I think. As I mentioned earlier, the bankruptcy was so different for me because I had very little knowledge of what to do. Now, I had been through several acquisitions before where we had taken companies on. I had been through another sale merger when I was with TDK Electronics. So in some respects, bankruptcy was completely different because we were dealing, and there were a ton of reporting requirements that my department was, amongst others, my department was asked to pull for the courts, for the uninsured creditors. So we had all of these requests coming at us at the same time, and where the similarity really hits through any organizational change. It's worrying about the employees, right? And everyone, including myself, was kind of like, what does this mean for us, right? I mean, in any change, an HR leader, the CEO of the company, no matter what you say, employees boil it down to one statement: what does this change mean for me? And so having been through so much change in my career, I felt I was in a good place to really, once I got my bearings about the bankruptcy process and what was happening, making sure that our employees felt that they were in the know as much as we could release, because again, being a public company, we had to be very careful about releasing non-public information. But a lot of the same premises, just making sure that there's open and frequent communication, that leadership is visible, that employees feel like their questions are being answered. So we did that with a lot of town halls and a lot of like one-on-one individual discussions.
And I know there are so many different change models that are used. I teach some of these in the university space when I'm teaching an org development and change class. We'll go through various models, we'll apply them, we'll do case studies, we'll do projects where the students have a chance to experience it. But I know every firm tends to have their own model, that their own approach as they deal with change. Every consulting organization tends to have their own specific approach. Have there been any particular change models that you've honed in on over time that you found helpful to apply in these types of situations, or perhaps gaps that you see in the existing models that are out there?
Yeah, I'm having studied in HR and with my undergrad and master's, we learn a lot of the theoretical, a lot of the model and how that applies. And the best advice and what I've kind of followed is really just know your organization and what's going to work, right? For me, I've gravitated towards the Kubler-Ross change curve, which almost like, and its origination is very much like the stages of grief, right? That employees, when they hear news about a change, they're going to go through denial, they're going to go through acceptance, they're going to go through all of the stages of grief that an individual goes through when they lose someone close to them. And so I've kind of gravitated towards that, and I've used it very loosely. What I prefer is, and for people that have known me throughout my organizations, I'm very transparent. It's just really understanding your audience, and I think that that has served me well in the various companies that I've worked at. And specifically at Aceto, we were about close to 300 at the time of our Chapter 11, and between the U.S. and our foreign subsidiaries, I had grown pretty deep relationships with everyone, and so that helped me make sure that the message got across, but also what was the best modality. There's also that phrase that sometimes people need to hear bad news or news 7 times before it actually sinks in. So constantly reiterating the message, of what we wanted to deliver, and making sure that at the end of the day, our employees felt like they were being taken care of and heard. But yeah, for me, I love the models. It really gives you a framework, but I prefer to really work with understanding the organization and what's going to work within that specific company.
Yeah, it sounds like we probably have a similar approach. I think models are great, especially when you're new to the field and you're trying to learn how to make sense of complex data,
Right,
all the complex information and the contexts that are out there. But the reality is models are simplified versions of reality by necessity, right? And every context is different. Every organization is different. You can get 2 similarly sized companies with similar backstory, kind of histories and progression of development, same sector, same industry. And guess what? No 2 change initiatives at those companies are going to be the same. And so you got to be really careful when you become a little bit, I see it so often where people get really dogmatic around these models. And it's almost like their religion. It's like gospel to them that this is the model that you have to follow. And the reality is they're oversimplified versions of reality that provide some good insights and give us ways to make sense of a messy, complex world. But at the end of the day, there's no substitute for just knowing the organization, listening to the people, getting input, collecting data, just in understanding the unique context that you find yourself in every time you're going through these types of initiatives. And so models are great as long as we don't become overly reliant on them. And as you said, just know the organization, get to know the organization. That goes a really long way as you try to foster greater levels of transparency and open communication and buy-in amongst the various stakeholders to help improve the chances of a change initiative being successful and positive and healthy.
Exactly. And one other thing that I'll add, John, is a lot of times there are roadblocks, right? You have employees that aren't on board, and they do everything in their power to disrupt or block, and in a certain way become a cancer within the organization of what we're trying to do. And it's really important to deal with those. Sometimes you're able to turn those situations around with a lot of coaching, but very often you have to deal with that, right? And whether it's unfortunately in some cases having to exit the individual out so the change can proceed, and that's happened several times, not at Aceto, but at other career junctures for me, and having to make those decisions so the whole is better off, rather than being brought down by one or two individuals that can really cause a lot of damage within the organization. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and it's a tricky thing, because on the one hand, you need psychological safety so that people feel like they have a safe space to speak up and to speak out and to point out problems and challenges and those sorts of things. And sometimes someone simply sounding the alarm can become labeled very quickly within an organization as a problem person, as someone who's not a team player. But that's not what you're talking about.
No,
and so
not at
we
all.
we have to be very careful, as we're trying to quote unquote deal with the people who aren't getting on board, but also recognizing we need space for people to provide dissent and to speak up and to share their input. In fact, that's a part of the process of generating buy-in, is when you create that psychological safety, then more people are going to feel like they're part of the process. They're going to feel like they've been heard, and they're going to feel like the ultimate outcome is better for the institution as a whole. And they'll get caught up less on the little things that may not be as ideal or exactly what they would want to do or how they would like to see the changes made.
Right. And that dissent is also critical as well, and that feedback. Because it also forces us, right, the leadership in the organization to maybe think of things that maybe we haven't thought of, right? And as you're going through like major organizational shifts, sometimes you do miss some things, right? I mean, leaders are not perfect, and it's really critical that we do have those employees that feel comfortable bringing things up to us in a proactive manner, and feel that they could do so in a safe space, because they also teach us and they make us better leaders. Just thinking about maybe aspects that we didn't consider, right?
Yeah.
And look, I think in any organization, you always have influential individuals that are respected by their peers. They carry a lot of weight. Maybe sometimes they're often used as representatives for a larger group of employees, right? And it's really important to hear them out. But the example I was using is, very often you have one or two rogue individuals that will do everything to undermine, any positive feedback or direction. And that's where I think as a firm, you have a responsibility to really, watch out and take care of those situations.
Yeah, and this kind of leads into, I think, what will have to be our last question. I note the time, it's flying by, and I'll have to let you go here in a few minutes. But maybe the last question for today is, what does this look like then from a leadership perspective If I'm trying to lead change in an organization, generally, yes, but specifically within this kind of disruptive situation of bankruptcy, and I'm trying to create a psychologically safe environment. I'm trying to have open communication, seek feedback, listen carefully, lead strategically, like all those sorts of things. What are some of the most important traits that you've seen in your experience that is going to help someone navigate that minefield as a leader in that environment? Because it's not going to be easy. And like you said, no one's going to be perfect. There's going to be missteps.
Right.
I guess the trick is to not missteps are fine, but you also don't want to step on that mine and then blow
Right.
everything. So how do we, what are those most
Uh,
important traits that we need to be dealing with?
Well, what's really interesting is, during the bankruptcy and using my own experience, we were all so busy with so many different requests coming in at a time, and very often behind closed doors, a good amount of time. At a time where leadership really does need to be visible, right? So it was a balancing act, and one that we consciously took to make sure that we just weren't behind our closed doors all day responding to these myriad of requests. And so, and in your book, I think, The Alchemy of Truly Remarkable Leadership, I know you talk a little bit about the competencies for leaders, the future of work. And I think no matter where the organization is, some of the key attributes or traits that I've seen, especially during the bankruptcy or in any change, and I don't list these in any particular order, but empathy is critical, right? I think, very often, leaders lose sight of that, and having the empathy, understanding what the change means for the employees and being able to connect is critical. Communication, and we talked about that a lot this morning, just about getting out there, and the communication can be informal, right? Hey, I'm in the kitchen and I'm talking to 5 people, to more of the town halls, right? That we did throughout the process. So it really is important in terms of the communication. Two others, transparency, super critical. And I think what enabled me to be to kind of guide my organization through this is that, being in the corporate office here in New York, I traveled very frequently to our foreign subsidiaries. And so I built that trust and credibility over time. And so when the change was coming, I was as transparent as I could be. And, more importantly, that trust and credibility really got me through, right? And our team really understood where we were. They believed me, and that was really important in getting us through. And then finally, decisiveness. I've worked with leaders that just could not make a decision, and sometimes that is a decision, right? That you just choose to deny it or choose to overlook it. So decisiveness is super critical, because you're making very often in those types of situations really quick decisions that are going to impact individuals. And so decisiveness, transparency, communication,
Yeah.
empathy, all critical.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Charles, this has just been a really great conversation. I know we've only scratched the surface, but you have a book so people can check it out and find out more. As we wrap things up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Sure. So I'm reachable on LinkedIn. You can also reach me at my email address, which is simply my name, charlesjalaimo@gmail.com. And also my book can be found on Springer Publishing as well as Amazon. It's also part of the SHRM library, so you could definitely look at it from there. And look, I'm a firm believer that there is no bad experience. There are just learning experiences, and for me, the bankruptcy was another learning experience that I really I grew. I grew through. And to say that after 30 years in HR is great, right? Every day you're growing, and just keep growing, looking for those opportunities. So thank you, John.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charles. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Charles can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page. And please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.